An angry President Obama said yesterday that it was a shameful day in Washington after the U.S. Senate failed to take up the issue of expanded background checks. Today, the president was criticized by Republicans for his comments as Democrats vowed to take up this issue again. This issue of expanded background checks has been before the Minnesota legislature this session, too, and one of the critics of such an expansion testified that they wouldn't work to reduce gun crime. Kevin Vick is a licensed firearm dealer and owner of Crucible Arms in Lakeville, and he joins me now. Good afternoon, Mr. Vick. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon. Glad to be here.
So what do you see as the problem with the expansion of background checks? Because you have testified against that here in Minnesota.
Well, the biggest issue is the fact that the majority of criminals do not go through background checks, and they wouldn't be going through this particular bill's recommendations as well. The bill that was before the Senate had to do with background checks being performed at gun shows and on the internet. And more specifically, 98% of gun show sales are done through people like me, federally licensed firearm dealers. So only 2% are actually private sales between individuals. And the internet sales that are being referred to are simply private sales that are held inside the state between two private people. Again, if it's an interstate internet sale, that is required to go through an FFL like me and is subject to a background check. So when you really start to get into the details of the bill and what it was impacting and affecting, it's a very, very small percentage of the overall transfers done in this country. And therefore, people who are advocates of the Second Amendment and who are as concerned about reducing gun crime as anyone else are very, very much interested in doing things that will impact crime. And we don't see this very small measure as being anything other than a way for Washington to be able to say that something/anything was done to reduce gun crime.
When you testified in the Minnesota Senate, personally, you said that you very much would like to see a reduction in gun crime. So what is not being done that you'd be agreeable to?
Three primary things. First off, we as a state right now are not required to report mental adjudications to the NICS system, the NICS FBI background check system. So the current system has considerable flaws and holes in it in trying to capture people who shouldn't be getting their hands on firearms. So the first thing I would do is not only just mandate states to supply updated records to the NICS system, but to also fund that endeavor. The second thing would be to make sure that recidivist criminals don't get re-released to reoffend. Again, 70% of people who commit gun crimes have already been incarcerated for gun crimes in the past. And then third, we're going to have to really look at our mental health system and what we can do to understand why people who commit these crimes do so and how do we intervene ahead of these events. What's interesting to me is when we look at the bombing in Boston recently, we're very concerned with finding out why it is that the bomber did this. But when we talk about gun crimes, we're interested in why is it that the guns are available. So we really need to focus on why is it that people commit these crimes as opposed to the tools they commit them with.
What do you make of the argument? People might say yourself, you're a firearms dealer, you sell guns, and so because of that, it would just be bad for business to have any restrictions at all in place.
Yeah, we have over 20,000 laws on the books right now regarding firearms. It's one of the most heavily regulated industries in our country. So what we need to do is enforce those, and I am fully behind that. There are a number of restrictions. I'm not advocating that we loosen restrictions whatsoever. But what I don't want to see is additional legislation that we're not going to enforce.
Kevin Vick is a licensed firearm dealer, owner of Crucible Arms in Lakeville. Thank you very much for your perspective on this and for joining us today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.